Anyway, today we're going to look at the phrase, God will never give you more than you can handle. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Is it true? Does the Bible really say that? But of course, if I'm speaking on it, you probably already have made the right conclusion. It doesn't. But anyway, what's more important is what does the Bible have to say about these things? And as we have had for most of these lessons, we have a wee video. So let's see how this one goes. See if I can get this halfway down. There we go. Maybe that'll pick up. We shall see. Make sure my volume's up. And here goes.
Hey, hon.
Hey.
What's up?
You okay?
I'm just exhausted. Work's been so stressful. My dad is sick again. I don't know.
Dude, she needs some encouragement. Oh, don't say that. Look, I know it's been tough, but you've been doing so well.
I just don't feel that way. Let me explain.
Whoa. What just happened? Anytime she's about to explain something to me, I try to think the quickest way to solve the problem. Do you really think that's a good idea? Yeah, trust me, it works every time. And you are always a big part of it. All right, check it out. Your wife needs some solid advice. What does the Bible say about this kind of stuff? Well, I know that God can handle anything, and God is for us. Wait a minute, I've got it.
Last week.
You know, babe, God will never give you more than you can handle. Anyway, I'm gonna go meet up with you guys. Love you. Bye. Thanks for the help. I did not even say that.
I would suggest if your wife does that, you don't do that. That would not go over very well. That's not a good idea. But anyway, God will never give you more than you can handle. Now, I know I've used that phrase at times. And perhaps similarly to the way the young husband did, but hopefully not the exact way he did it. But just to say somebody, and I think we use it when somebody's facing difficulties in life. We're trying to encourage them, aren't we, to keep going. In some sense, there's some truth that we can convey in that statement, but there's a lot of things in there that is just not found. It's not found in Scripture. So notice what Paul wrote to the Christians in Corinth, and this is where I think we get this idea from. He said, no testing has overtaken you that is not common to everyone. God is faithful. He will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. Now, your translation may not say precisely that. Because depending on your translation, depends on what it says there. Although it really all means basically the same thing. The word there for testing is the Greek word perosmos. Get Alec to pronounce that later for us. He took Greek, I didn't. But, and it basically means, notice there's several little ways we can go with this. An experiment, an attempt, a trial, a proving, temptation. I think that's where most of our translations go, is with the idea of temptation. The New Revised Standard Version there has testing. That's one of the reasons I use it, because it uses something different. The NIV, if you have that open, will have the word temptation, but it does have a footnote on it that says that the word also means testing. Wow, yeah, it does. The ESV, the New American Standard, go with temptation. The Net Bible goes with trial. And I hope we can see that testing, trial, temptation, all three words work okay. That's what the Greek word means. And temptations are testings, aren't they? Temptations are trials. So there is an interlinking of the three words anyway. But what this verse is saying is that whatever we face in life, giving in to sin is not an option. We can't avoid tests and temptations. It isn't if we have to face them, it's when we have to face them. Being a Christian doesn't mean life becomes easier. In fact, I think when you become a Christian, in many ways, it becomes harder. When we become a Christian, we, in essence, put a target on our back. But what Paul wrote tells us that we can always escape the test, escape the temptation, escape the trial. We don't have to give in. Our enemy is going to harass us. He could tempt us or test us beyond what we could bear, and we would give in. But do you remember Job? Job in the Old Testament. God told Satan, Satan wants to test Job. God says to Satan, you can go this far, but no further. See, God puts a limit on what Satan can do. Now, we have no idea how often God may tell Satan about us. No more. You can't go beyond that. God will never allow us to take a temptation test that there's no way we can pass. That's what the verse is really saying. The reason is this: there's always an out. And that out, of course, is based on Jesus and what he's gone through for us, what he has done for us. There's always an out. Paul talks more about facing troubles, though, when we get to his second letter, and that's where I want to be this morning. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. I'm going to pick up with verse 8. We're going to drop back to verse 3 in a bit. But I'm going to pick up with verse 8. And one of the points that Paul is emphasizing here is that Christians face troubles. If you think you're a Christian, don't face troubles, Paul's going to put into that very quickly here. He says there in verse 8, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the trials we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. New Living Translation, again, it's a bit more of a paraphrase than a translation at times, but it puts it this way, and I think it's the point across. We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. See, at no time must we become overcome by sin. But there are times when we are going to be overwhelmed with life. And that's what Paul's talking about here. They faced troubles when they were in what we would say today, Western Turkey. That's the Roman province of Asia. What they were going through was beyond their ability to endure. This is Paul writing this. Beyond their ability to endure. They thought there was no way they were going to live through the troubles they were facing. I'm wondering if he's talking about that time in Ephesus with the riots and they were screaming for their blood. It could have been something like that. They despaired of life itself. Well, what does that tell us? That tells us there are going to be situations in life that overwhelm us, that we cannot endure. But notice precisely what Paul says here. He says they couldn't, it was beyond their ability to endure it. They couldn't get through it on their own. And that's the point there. See, although God doesn't send these troubles that we have to face, God does allow them. Think about, again, go back to Job. Think about Job. God didn't send the disasters on Job, where he lost literally everything except for his wife and his life in a day. God didn't send that. God allowed that to happen to him. There's a difference between sending it and allowing it to happen. Think about David in the Psalms. David faced ups and downs. I enjoy reading the Psalms because David doesn't pull punches when he's talking to God. He tells God the way it is, and why don't you do something about it? Just read through the Psalms anytime you're down. Just read the Psalms. But sometimes he basically wrote, God, I can't take it anymore. And God put these psalms, these songs, in essence, into what we might call a hymnal, the book of Psalms. That was the songbook of the early Christians. That's what they sang from. That's the songbook of the Jews. These psalms that David wrote. Well, what does all that tell us? It tells us when we face the troubles of life, what we need to be doing is worshiping God. Suffering and troubles in life are a given. They're going to happen, so we need to be ready when they do happen. They are going to be in our lives. But that's not all Paul said about it. Next verse, verse 9. He says, indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. Okay, what's that telling us? When the troubles we face in life overwhelm us, there's one place we need to turn to, and that's God. We need to learn to rely on God. The message is a very much a paraphrase. Notice that in the translation, it's 3 lines there on screen. Here it is in the Message. So it's elaborated on a bit, but I think he gets the point across. He says, we felt like we'd been sent to death row, that it was all over for us. As it turned out, it was the best thing that could have happened. Instead of trusting in our own strength or wits to get out of it, we were forced to trust God totally. Not a bad idea, since he's the God who raises the dead. I like that. Paul and those who were with him felt they had received a sentence of death. They felt it was all over. And I do like the way Eugene Peterson, who did the Message, put it. It was the best thing that could have happened. We don't really look at troubles that way, do we? Best thing could have happened. How can you view troubles, how can you view suffering as the best thing that could have happened? And Paul says, there was one reason. They were forced to trust in God because they couldn't solve it by their own wits, by their own strength. Nothing they could do about it. You're forced to trust in God. See, suffering and troubles teach us to rely on God. I know as a people, we tend to value self-reliance. We think we can survive on our own. That was ingrained in me going through primary school because we were Americans after all. We could pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And that's what we were taught. But that's not the way God made us. You see, we were created to need God, not to do it on our own. We often think of things in our life as mountaintop experiences. Things are really good. There's a retreat this weekend. Gina and I know Irene will be there. That's a mountaintop experience. That's going to be really, really good. Very encouraging. But you can't stay there. You can't stay up there. That's not real life. That's not what it's about. The thing is, we've got to come down from the mountaintop and experience God in the valleys of life as well. When everything doesn't always go the way we wish it would. In fact, I would say more often than not, it does not go the way we wish it would. We think of the Apostle Paul as a great man of God. And he was, no doubt about that. He was given the ability to see and converse with Jesus himself. And that changed his life. And later, he looked into what he called the third heaven. That seems to have been he looked into the very throne room of God himself. But then he was given what he called a thorn in the flesh, the mountaintop and the valley. It happened to him. Here's what he wrote about it in 2 Corinthians 12. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. A thorn in the flesh. I'm sure we all face things that we could call thorns in the flesh. Whatever this thorn was that Paul was given, he begged God 3 times to take it away. And God's response, nah, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. God protected Paul from pride by allowing Satan to assault him with this, because he calls it a messenger of Satan, with whatever this thorn in the flesh was. See, we become more aware of God and his grace when we are suffering. Anything that humbles us should be helpful. God gives grace to the humble. If we're saying, I can't handle this anymore, that is showing weakness, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a good thing, because God doesn't give grace instead of weakness. God gives us grace in the midst of our weakness. When we are overwhelmed, we need to turn to God and learn to rely on him for our strength. But there's more. He didn't stop there. Verse 10, he says, he has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us as you help us by your prayers. That many will give thanks on our behalf for the gracious favor granted us in answer to the prayers of many. Paul and those who are with him were delivered from a deadly peril. And he says God would continue to deliver. But notice what he said was a help for them. The prayers of the Christians. God's gracious favor, he says, came from the prayers of many Christians. How does all that work? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. But I do know that it's important that we be praying for each other, because that's the way God's grace is given. Paul said that here. Grace comes from God's people. That tells us that we need to be there for each other. Being a Christian is really a team effort. We cannot be a Christian alone. God's grace often comes through people who understand what we're going through. Notice what Paul wrote that led into this whole discussion of what he'd been through and the troubles that he'd faced. Going back up to the beginning of this letter, starting in verse 3. He says, all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father and the source of all comfort. He comforts us in all our troubles so that we can give comfort to others, so that we can comfort others. When they're troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. For the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with his comfort through Christ. Even when we are weighed down with troubles, it's for your comfort and salvation. For when we ourselves are comforted, we will certainly comfort you. Then you can patiently endure the same things we suffer. We're confident that as you share in our sufferings, you will also share in the comfort God gives us. Again, notice what Paul's saying here. We give others the comfort that God gives us. When we receive the comfort of others, it helps us get through what we're facing. We all share sufferings. We all share troubles. We also share the comfort that God gives us, and we share that often through God's family, through our Christian family. It's okay, by the way, to ask God for the thorns to be removed. After all, Paul did. But we need to understand that God may want it there for a reason. That he's not ignoring us, but he knows what is best for us. Think about an oyster. Oyster produces a beautiful pearl that we wear as jewelry. Actually, I don't personally wear any pearls, but I know some people do. But it's jewelry. Why do oysters produce pearls? It's because of an irritation. Something got under its skin, so to speak. And this usually they suggest a piece of irritating sand, and as it's covered, to protect itself, it forms this pearl. The pearl is basically the healed wound of an oyster. What does that tell us? Yes, we will suffer. Yes, we may be overwhelmed and end up being scarred by what we go through. After all, an oyster is. But it's our scars that can then help other people who go through something similar. I like this quote. I've had the chance to embrace more people with one arm than I ever could with two. That's obviously a guy who's lost an arm, right? This was a swimmer, actually, a world-class surfer who lost an arm in a shark attack. And that's what he said. I thought, wow, yeah, we can use our wounds to help others. He didn't allow his suffering to stop him. I would suggest that this room today is filled with weakness. In the last few days or weeks or months, how many people have been affected by death? That's most of us, by the way. How many people have been affected by divorce, by cancer, by addiction, by aging parents, mental illness? What about wayward children? See, apart from God's grace, how do we keep going? When life is more than we can handle, God's grace is more than we need. We need to offer our weaknesses to God for His glory. See, God never promised we wouldn't face more than we can handle, but He has promised to be there with us with His grace and with His mercy. Saw this yesterday. It was sent to me yesterday. I liked it. God doesn't give us what we can handle. God helps us handle what we're given. Yeah, think about that one. It's so true, isn't it? And keep in mind that sometimes God helps us through His people. We need to be there for each other, to be there to give the support that's needed, the prayers that are needed, sometimes just have a shoulder to cry on. We need to be there. I want to close with a song. It's I found these words on the internet. It's written in 1925 by somebody down in England. But it's "May the mind of Christ my Savior." I've said it, obviously, to a familiar tune. So